Hi, welcome to Straight Talk Real Estate with Ken Pletsky. I'm Ken, and I've been helping buyers, sellers, and investors navigate real estate for 30 years now. Gosh, it's been a long time. I've really enjoyed my career in real estate and love to share with folks all about it, whether they're buyers, sellers, investors, or agents, anyone that's interested in the real estate market and what it's all about. And that's the part that's kind of fulfilled me, making happy clients and educating people along the way. There's a part of real estate that sometimes buyers don't fully understand, and we've been going through this series on the Buyer Brokerage Agreement, and it's one of those contracts that a lot of buyers just tend to sign without actually not reading it in its entirety or asking a lot of great questions around it. And there's a part in this section, we've been going through this series on breaking it down, that we want to explain today. And that part's where, buyers don't fully understand what dual agency means. So in this episode, I'm going to break that down and what dual agency means to you as a buyer and what it actually means to you before you even make an offer, right? So there's some timing of being represented by an agent that you may not be aware of. We're going to talk a little bit about all of that and what that is. So let's just start with the basics. Dual agency happens to be working with the same agent or the same brokerage, right? And they represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. So if you're buying a house, you're working with a buyer agent who actually is representing the seller as well. That's a dual agency, right? So in Washington, it's referred to as a limited dual agency. And that word limited is important for you to understand. I mean, it's kind of exactly what it means. It says limited. There's certain responsibilities that an agent does not have to fulfill that they would necessarily if you were just exclusively represented by one side of that transaction. Because when a dual agency happens, the role of the agent kind of changes. There's no longer, they're fully advocating for one side. Instead, they're required to kind of remain neutral and just work fairly with both parties. And sometimes it just feels like being a scribe. I don't like doing dual agencies fully transparent. That's what I promised to be on this channel. And just because there's always this gray area that can sneak up, and then you're stuck in the middle as an agent. So it's really not an uncomfortable spot for an agent to be in as well. But it can also hinder the fiduciary relationship that we have representing you, right? So it means that we can't negotiate aggressively on your behalf. I mean, I have to remain neutral if I was a dual agent or a limited dual agent. And so that would definitely hinder you in the fact of, suggesting a offering price or negotiating against the seller that I represent. And this is where the, kind of gets really a big gray area. And I personally am not comfortable working in it. I know there's agents that advocate that dual agency should be completely allowed, whether it's limited or not. But it's also keeps you from sharing any confidential information, right? I mean, if the seller says, I would lower my price to this if I got the right offer, you technically can't take that to your buyer that you represent and tell them those terms exactly, because that was given to you in confidential information, right? So that's kind of where it starts to hinder you, and they can't guide you, or we can't guide you in that gives you an advantage over the other side, meaning because we know what sides are thinking. The buyer may say, hey, I'm willing to pay more, but you represent the seller. How do you keep that from your seller if you know that? Let me just share a little technique. One of the things that I do when I represent a buyer is I always call the listing agent and try to ask them as many questions as I can and investigate the motivation of the seller, any particular terms they might offer, what are they looking for in a situation. Well, under a dual agency or limited dual agency, I can't share that information freely as I could if I was only representing the buyer and calling a different listing agent on the seller side of that. So instead of having someone fully in your corner, you're kind of, having someone just facilitate the transaction. And that's a big difference. I mean, I after 30 years being in real estate, I kind of stopped doing dual agencies, I don't know, years and years ago, just because I had a seller that was selling some property and the buyer had an inspection period and had told me that they were going to back out. I was a seller's agent and the buyer's agent. And they were just going to wait until the term of backing out was coming. And so it really kind of became obvious at that moment in time that I felt uncomfortable in the situation because I represented the seller who I was supposed to be working my best for. And I was not able to go out and tell them, hey, this buyer is going to back out in about 10 days when the buyer had already told me that. And they were just holding on in case something changed or they had something locked up on this particular property. And if it did, maybe they would move forward, but most likely 99% chance that they were going to back out. So there's where you can come into a gray area, right? That's one of those areas. And so when these happen, sometimes, it's more often than not that people think that they're being represented exclusively, yet they're not. They're only being given limited capabilities of the agent. Now, the most common situation that this probably comes up is when you visit an open house. If you visit an open house and you're not under a buyer's agency agreement, that agent there typically would be representing the seller. And so if you want to write up an offer and you're talking with the listing agent and you start asking questions and they know the home, they're helpful, right? It's easy for them to just continue giving you information. And it's just as easy for you to say, well, you know everything there is to know about this house, so I want you to represent me. Well, that's when you start stepping into a dual agency situation. And that's where you can be represented, but not given full representation, if you will. I mean, you may want to have your own agent, right? I mean, if those situations are where the seller has this listing agent hold the open house, the listing agent is there to sell that house, but also to try to pick up buyers along the way. But at the same time, if they get in, they can't start showing you other house without being in a buyer agency agreement, according to the state law now. So, but they can provide you information, and then to go later and sign a buyer's agency agreement with you after they've given you everything and all the details, what the seller is going to give or maybe motivated to pay, then they've kind of basically broke the agency relationship in some manner with the seller by giving you too much data. And that can also be created in a brokerage setting when a brokerage has the listing and they have another agent out of their brokerage at the open house sitting it and telling you information that they got from the listing agent, but they are going to represent you. They're technically under a limited dual agency as well. So either way, it's going to require your consent. You have to opt in to say, I'm okay with you representing me and a seller under limited dual agencies, but you just got to understand what that means and what you're going to get. You may not get all the details. You won't get coaching. You won't get advice on how to structure a deal. That won't be a little bit of it'll be held back a little bit because of the fact that it's just in a situation where they represent the seller as well. And they're trying to get the most they can for the seller, but also trying to get you to buy the house, right? So if you walked into the open house, you like the open home, or you like the home, and you want to make an offer, you might want to start interviewing other agents outside of the listing agent to actually help you write the offer up. Because at that moment, it feels convenient to go with the listing agent because you might even think you have an advantage because maybe they know there's all the details. But here's the reality. The agent just represents the seller at that time. But when you go to write your offer on the house, then they're going to be talking to you about a buyer's agent representation so that they can earn the other side of the commission as well. So if you're in that position, you're going to need to ask questions like, what should I offer, right? You know, who's going to be doing the escrow? Should I get an inspection? Because a seller's agent, if you're unrepresented, doesn't have to start giving you all the ins and outs of the contract. They're representing the seller. So why would they provide you information that would give you escape clauses from a purchase and sell a contract? They probably won't, right? It'll be your responsibility and your experience and your knowledge of real estate. And if you're a first-time home buyer, it probably isn't much. So that's why these podcasts are important. That's why I'm doing these kind of things, is so that I can educate you, to tell you what you're signing and when you should sign something and what that process looks like. Because if you're in a position of asking what I should offer, then you think the seller's agent is going to be recommending a lesser amount or a full price offer or a full price offer plus closing costs. I mean, all kinds of things. You know, how strong do I need to be? They may even imply that the seller won't take anything less, when the reality is, if you're working with a different agent that's bringing in an offer, they're going to be coaching you on what the market is doing, what sellers are accepting in the market, you know, what kind of terms and contingencies that you should be putting into the contract, and those kind of things. So these are things that when a listing agent starts to provide, they can't hurt the seller because they already represent them, right? And they can't tell you exactly what it takes to win. So you need to probably consider having your own buyer agent representative. And that's why we're breaking down this contract, because it goes on to say, you know, how long it lasts for. It goes on to say, you know, who's representing who in exclusive or non-exclusive. And we're talking about the limited dual agency. This is where you are going to work with a seller's agent to write up an offer on a property that they have, or a builder's agent who has a bunch of listings in a subdivision that the builder has had them be the listing agent on. And you go in there and you just find it easy because they know all the data, they know the properties, they know the plans, all of that information. You can get that information and then go find yourself another buyer broker to represent you in the transaction. And I think it's just as important to have that separation so that you can understand exactly why you should structure an offer a certain way, instead of having it implied by a listing agent on maybe it would benefit their seller better. And here's another situation. You know, you're working with an agent you trust, right? You've built a relationship and they're helping you through the process. Then they find you a home and you write an offer, and it happens to be listed by someone else in the same brokerage. So this is the opposite of what we're talking about. Now you still have your own agent, which is good, right? But the brokerage level still has a form called the limited dual agency. So here's what happens there. There might have been some hallway talk. There might have been, let's call it a break room where they're sitting there talking about the interest of a buyer that is interested in the other agent's property that they have listed. So what could happen is that there could be some internal boundaries that are starting to be crossed over or getting a little bit gray, depending on how it's handled, depending on how the representation is going. And it might be that two agents are, kind of conspiring, not conspiring like illegally, but trying to make the buyer and the seller happy and come to terms and create something that would benefit their seller, and of course then at least get the sale to the buyer side of it, so that buyer's agent earns their commission as well. But there's still a little bit of gray area there, right, where a seller may not obviously be at an advantage either for signing a dual agency as well, right? Because of who knows what the agent's ethical, moral compass is. And this is one thing that I pride myself on, is because I know my gray areas, and I'm happy to walk away or turn away or hand a client off to someone in a situation where there might be a dual agency situation, because it's just what I've seen, and it's what I've witnessed, and it's what I have had experienced over the years. So I've seen buyers step into dual agency situations without really understanding what they're giving up. And most of the time it's not intentional. It's just because they want the property bad and they are looking for someone to fulfill that, but they've never been given the option of what that would look like to have their own exclusive agency company working for them, right? It happens because things feel easy in the moment. They like the house. The agents they're talking to are nice and they feel comfortable, so they just move forward. And then when it comes to negotiate or make that decision, maybe during an inspection period or during some type of a contingency, they're not getting the same guidance as they had expected, because now those two agents are kind of working together because they're under a dual agency brokerage, where it needs some more clarity, right? So it needs some more understanding of what's going to be the benefit for this buyer, or what's going to represent you in the best manner, right? So there's clarity up front that makes a difference, and that's understanding what dual agency means. And there's lots of mistakes that can happen. And I'll give you a couple examples. First, assuming the listing agent is helping you in the same way that your own agent would. That's a mistake, right? The listing agent's not. They're there to sell the house for their seller. They're there to make sure it fits your wants and needs, yes, and really kind of emphasize that it might, but it doesn't mean you have to work with them as your buyer representative. They can help, but they're just not going to represent you. They shouldn't probably be wanting to put themselves in that situation if they fully understand the gray area that starts to happen there. Second, thinking a dual agency and it might give you an advantage in negotiation, it kind of doesn't. It really limits you on how much advice and strategy that you can receive. If you were asking, what should I offer? And you're asking the listing agent that question, what do you think they're going to say? What suggestion might you come up with right now that you'd be going, well, if I was that agent, I would tell them to come in at full price, right? Or I would tell them maybe offer just a little bit less, instead of trying to offer and structure an offer that you're comfortable with, that meets your comfort level on your monthly payments, right? And so it really gives you a limit on how much advice and strategy you receive. Thirdly, you've got emotional interest invested in the home, and it's time to think about representation. But now you're kind of sold, and so by that point, it's kind of hard to take a step back, and you need to really consider that before you go shopping or before you go out into the market looking at open houses. Maybe you should start with looking for agents who are going to represent you in that transaction and give you the best advice and the best game plan to move forward in purchasing a house, and explaining this entire form to you so that you have complete understanding and clarity around what it means. So here's the bottom line. Now I'll wrap up, because we've been going on this series and I hope you've seen them all. And it's been a busy week. I've been sick this week, so I'm really getting back in the hang of it. I kind of probably got a hoarse voice, but you're not getting the same level of representation when you are under a limited dual agency agreement. It can't be, right? I mean, you're getting limited services, right? That doesn't make dual agency wrong, but it does make it different. I mean, I'm completely comfortable. If let's say I had a family friend or a relative that was walking into the situation and they wanted some advice on writing an offer on a property that I had listed, I'm completely fine with being a dual agent, but I would explain there's limits of what I can provide you. Nothing confidential. I can't recommend anything on pricing. I can't structure anything that would be a hurt to, or kind of hindrance for my seller, right? All I can do is scribe what you tell me you want to do. But if you want someone negotiating for you, protecting your position, helping you structure the best possible contract that's out there, that means having your own representation. It means kind of staying away from the limited dual agency. And if you're going to get into it, you got to understand it first and know what kind of situation you're in, not after you're already in it and now you're negotiating another part of the transaction, whether it's inspection or the title contingency or the appraisal contingency, all of those things. So here's what I want you to take away. Dual agency means that it's the same agent or the same brokerage that represents both sides. That's simple. It's pretty clear. What happens, that agent becomes neutral and they're not going to fully advocate for you. They're not going to fully give you all the advice and structure things the way that you want, right? Because when they're neutral, they have to stay in between the buyer and the seller, right? And it commonly happens in open houses or within the same brokerage. But the reality is the biggest thing that you can understand that they have a job to do, and their job is to sell that property and make you feel comfortable with it, but you're just not going to get that same level of representation. If you really think about it, you probably could ask yourself, if I was working, with the seller's agent, am I getting the best deal possible? Or are they representing the seller and trying to get the seller the best deal possible? So I hope it helps. I mean, in the next episode, we're going to be talking about compensation and how agents get paid, what's negotiable, and how it ties directly into your offer when you structure an offer, because there's been some changes in that form as well when we talk about the purchase contract. And this is where it's going to really start to impact your bottom line, right? So if you found this helpful, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode. I'm breaking down the entire buyer brokerage service agreement process in the step-by-step, paragraph by paragraph is what it really boils down to. And I'm trying to give clarity and confidence so that you know what kind of form you're signing and that you know what you're looking at when you get into the buyer brokerage agreement. If you're thinking about buying and you want to walk through this process and this form, get some answers to some questions that you might have, I'd be happy to help. So thanks again. This is Ken Pletsky with Straight Talk Real Estate. No fluff, no BS.